Let me start the introductions, though. Got John Daughtery, who's at Raymond James, and he's an energy banker. And he does a lot of banking on both traditional energy, but also on the new green initiatives that are going on. And so he has a lot of background in both of those and will tell us a lot about the marketplace and what's happening out there today. William Taggart is a good friend of mine and is a mechanical engineer that spent many, many years in the oil patch. And he really knows a lot about mechanically how these things work. When we were dealing with trying to sort out what happened during the Uri freeze and why the gas supplies failed, he was invaluable in explaining the sort of nuts and bolts about that. He's written a book called Fixing America. He's an ambitious mechanical engineer, and it's going to be available outside afterward if you want to stop by and see him and get a copy of his book. He'll be out there and you can visit with him. And the other guy on the panel is one of my other friends of long standing. He was also the finance chair of my mayoral campaign, the first campaign, James Calaway. Now, James is my global warming is going to kill all human beings since anytime really soon guy, my friend that I have. And he is, but James puts his money where his mouth is. And he's off working on lithium battery mines and solar deals in the Anaconda Desert in Chile and all sorts of green initiatives. He's put his money where his mouth. By the way, his family's oil and gas. His dad was a big wildcat or oil and gas guy. So he's made this transition. And so what we've got here is a group of people that are have a little bit different backgrounds and I think different kind of perspectives on this issue a little bit. But this is critically important to Houston because I don't care what you say about all the other stuff we do. At our heart, we're energy. And how we navigate this transition and how fast it happens is going to have a very big impact on Houston's success going forward. So the first thing I want to do, and I'm going to start over here and let y'all go across, I'd like you to tell people kind of what your sense is of how the energy transition is going, kind of the speed of it, and also to some extent, can you make offer a little bit about what effect you think this change of administration, the change of policy, will have on the trajectory of the energy transition? So, John, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So first off, I don't think the energy transition's a great name for what's happening anymore. If you look at the projected energy demands of our society and the world, a lot of which is now being driven by this artificial intelligence revolution, the energy demand in the U.S. by 2030 is expected to increase by 135%. That's happening due to data centers. That's happening due to the electrification of everything, your vehicles, your home. So I think what's happening is we're getting into this age more of energy diversity and abundance. And in order for us to meet that forecast and projected demand, we're going to need every electron we can get our hands on, whether it comes from fossil fuels or renewable sources. We have the Inflation Reduction Act, which was put in place by the Biden administration, which provides a lot of the incentives and tax credits that are available to clean energy, has been very successful. We're adding upwards of 20 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity in the U.S. per year, and that's a tremendous amount. The Trump administration, I think, is going to make changes to that legislation. I don't think anybody has a great idea of what that's going to look like right now, but there likely will be changes. I don't think they're going to do anything to completely destroy the industry. Chris Wright, who's now leading the Department of Energy, I think he's a very pragmatic individual. He understands the industry extremely well, both on the fossil fuel side and renewable energy side as well.
Okay, so you heard the demand side. Now let me tell you the supply side. We have no clue. We are about to double our LNG, liquefied natural gas export capacity. We are adding all these natural gas power plants. We voted, 2 years ago on the Texas Energy Fund We voted for a $10 billion fund to fund more natural gas power plants in Texas. We are now facing the point where oil CEOs are now actively talking about the Permian peaking in 3 to 8 years. Oil production last year was flat because all the rest of the shale and deep water and onshore stuff declined, but the Permian grew and kept it flat. When the Permian peaks, that stops. Okay? There are other fields we're looking at. There's the Uinta up in Utah. There's Alaskan stuff. They're not big enough. When the Permian peaks, the whole dynamics of the energy industry changes. I ran into an ex-boss at a Christmas party in December, and I said, I'm hearing 4 to 8 years. He said 3 years, and at that point, all hell breaks loose. Okay? Now, from my standpoint, I wasn't a big fan of the Biden legislation because we are at that point, we were $36 trillion in debt. Now we're up in the $37 trillion debt range. And all of that was being funded with future tax credits. That is future tax dollars to pay for stuff now. We're just digging a bigger hole for our children and our grandchildren. I have a problem with that. I agree with what John said. We need every electron, and we need to start thinking about what we need to do now. I'll give you an example. Who's our biggest global geopolitical rival? Who is our geopolitical rival? China. Okay. China has 26 gigawatts of nuclear power plants in construction. With the Vogtle, Georgia plant being complete, we have 0. Okay. The other thing, Bill mentioned, I wrote a book. The book's outside. I'm also working on long-duration energy storage. I left the oil industry late 2020. I've been working on this other stuff. I still consult the industry. China has 89 gigawatts of pump storage, hydroelectric, and construction. That is long-duration energy storage. The U.S. built 23 gigawatts back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We have none under construction. We may have one project starting. China has built 50 gigawatts. They have another 89 gigawatts in construction. What pump storage? So lithium-ion batteries are like energy closets, okay? They're small. Pump storage is energy warehouse. It's 20 hours, 30 hours of storage. It is how you make your renewables work with your consumer demand. If you want to look at something, I've got a blog and I show you what the ERCOT curves look like. The ERCOT curves, in August, we have a 30 megawatt swing from 80,000 megawatts during the day to 50,000 megawatts at night. We have a 30,000 megawatt swing in August. That's tough to do, especially when you got renewables coming on and off, when you have the sun coming up and going down, when you have the wind changing constantly. Big long-duration energy storage would help you get through that phase. So that's what I'm seeing, is that China has clearly set a different goal. And my biggest problem is, and as Bill was talking about, it's this changing of political parties. Every 4 years we get a swing. We don't have a long-term energy plan. We got nothing. We are reacting to market forces that are causing us to do things now. The Texas legislature is saying, buy more natural gas power plants. I'm sorry to tell y'all, but that is the playbook from 10 years ago. That is not going to be the playbook in 10 years when the Permian has peaked, when the natural gas fields are starting to peak, and when we have twice as much LNG export. We will be, natural gas, I can see it being tight for the foreseeable future.
I told my wife, I said, honey, I'm going to go get executed this morning. She said, what for? I said, I'm going in and saying things that nobody in the crowd's going to want to hear. So no, I'm teasing, but I was slightly concerned. No, I am teasing. So, I start off my comments by saying that I happen to be one of the people who devoted their life to trying to bring down emissions as fast as possible. And I think that's the right thing to do, and the most prudent thing to do is to bring down emissions as fast as we can. But we can't do it in a way where we ignore economic realities. We can't do it in a way where we don't take into consideration the business interests that we're dealing with, et cetera, and the structure of our energy system, which is so huge and vast and complicated. But I personally believe that it is very much important for us to focus on bringing down emissions while we provide the energy, those electrons you're talking about. And I don't think that they're equivalent. An oil, a dirty coal, a dirty oil, even natural gas is not equivalent to a solar piece of electricity. And it's just not solar, but we're increasingly having battery storage. And I know a little bit about it because I'm one of the world's largest producers of lithium. I happen to be, and that I work with battery makers all the time, all over the world. And the cost of battery storage is coming down much faster than anybody could have possibly imagined. You don't hear that very much around here, but I'm telling you that, like down in, just give you an example, I build a lot of solar farms in the Atacama Desert of Chile because it's the best irradiance in the world. And it's a completely deregulated market, by the way. There's no subsidies or anything. By far, the least expensive electron in Chile, by a long shot, is from solar. It's much cheaper than thermal power there and many other places on Earth, and so we need to build that. But there is an intermittency problem with solar, which is the sun goes down or the wind stops blowing. You all have heard this. But what I'm getting ready to tell you is that the cost of storage of those electrons is falling much faster than most people think. I mean, it went from $4 per kilowatt hour to 85 cents just in the last 3 years. And so what's happening all over the world, not just where I work, but all over the world, is business people are understanding the opportunity to expand the time that we can have electrons that are zero emissions that come from solar by putting in storage. Now, whether it's pumped hydro, which is an interesting subject, pumped hydro, by the way, unfortunately, it's complicated. There's a lot of people trying to figure it out, but a lot of times you need good geography where you have something naturally high and something low, and unfortunately, so much of the best sun in the world is in superevaporitic, relatively flat environments where there's not any place to do that. So it's not quite as easy as one might think. But I do think that what we're seeing now is, instead of it just being that solar is the cheapest during the daytime, for instance, we're now seeing that where the big loads, demand loads, are right after the sun goes down. Those first 3 hours or 4 hours where there's huge demand, because, it's practical. It's when you go home, turn on your stoves, you turn on your lights, you heat your house, cool your house. Those are big hours for demand. And we are now seeing economically the ability to shift electrons from the daytime into storage, including lithium-ion batteries, and be able to account for a lot more of the electrons being clean. I think there's another area that we need to ask ourselves about, which is, okay, do you agree or disagree that emissions are bad? I mean, this current president, for some reason, has this idea, and does right, by the way, who's a smart guy. You're right, the new Secretary of Energy is smart, but he has a belief, I don't know what it's based on, but he has a belief that, yeah, we have climate change, but it's really not a very urgent matter, that it's something that we can all ignore for a long, long time and go about being the big oil and gas producers. Well, I don't think that's right. And I urge everybody to be critical about thinking about this, because if there's no plan B, and so the conservative thing to do, which I'm amazed it's not the conservative thing politically, but the conservative thing to do, in my opinion, is wherever we can make emission-free power, we should do that. It's very, very important to save for our children and my grandchildren. And if you haven't noticed, the world's changing around you. I mean, come on. I mean, the frogs have stopped croaking around here. Have you noticed that you don't hear any frogs anymore? There's a lot of things going on around us that we need to want to ignore because it's against our economic interest. But I think Houston has a great opportunity not to just be the leader in oil and gas, which is a transient position, but to be the energy capital of the world. We have so much talent here. And by the way, interestingly, surprisingly, for instance, in the lithium sector, just which I'm one of the leaders in the world in this area, it turns out that Houston, where I live, has become a hotbed for lithium development. I mean, you wouldn't believe the amount of capital that's coming from the oil industry moving over into lithium production, which is critical to have for battery storage. So we don't, and also the amount of work that's going on solar power and development and wind power. Houston's a force in this area. So
let me jump, because that was you're anticipating my next question is, you talked about what the transition. I think everybody up here at least thinks that there's going to be some transition, whether it's short or longer term, but we're moving that direction. So if you're trying to think long term, we need to be thinking about how Houston's going to navigate that. You seem to think that it's doing reasonably well in navigating. Is that a fair assessment?
I just think there's a lot more going on in the business world of Houston that relates to the transition than most people realize. We tend to think of ourselves as stuck with oil and gas, and I just don't think that's a fair representation of where we are, Bill.
What are you two guys seeing in terms of that?
So you have the Ion downtown, you have Greentown Labs, you have a number of startup incubators in the area, but it's a question of cash. So I'm working on a startup with long duration energy storage. I've met with investors and they're like, did you get any DOE funding? Not yet. So I'm working on that right now, but it's a question of taking risk, making that jump. The other thing is it's a market also. ERCOT is market driven. As a result, if you have long duration energy storage, you got to buy electricity cheap and you got to sell it high. That arbitrage is your entire income base. In 2023, a 10-hour, 80% efficient long duration energy storage system would have made $62 per megawatt hour. That's economic. We could do that. However, natural gas prices last year were $2. Natural gas peaker plants made a lot of electricity, and as a result, instead of making $62 per megawatt hour last year, you'd have made $27 and you'd have lost your shirt. So we don't have a stable market for long duration energy storage, and ERCOT does nothing to encourage it. So that's the first problem I see.
Bill, I just have to comment on that.
Go ahead.
Look, it's one thing when you start talking about doing development stage for innovation in things like that, where you're taking very high risk situation. What has surprised me is, in the work that I do, I spend all my time trying to build big industrial facilities. So I don't spend any time anymore. I used to do that, but I don't spend much time thinking about the future. I'm trying to think about how do we acquire the capital to build large facilities that help bring down emissions as fast as possible. And there's a bountiful amount of capital and interest in this city, and it's coming and it's flowing into this sector fast for kind of development stage kind of work versus.
Let me bring John because he actually does this day-to-day financing these things. So tell us how you think Houston is doing on navigating this transition.
Yeah, so I think Houston is very well positioned to participate in the energy transition, just with the companies we have here, with the talent pool we have here. It has everything you're looking for. There's been tons of capital raised to invest and participate in renewable energy and clean technology. The problem is, everything in finance and investing is about risk and reward, and they need to be paired together properly. Many of the large oil and gas private equity firms have also raised funds for renewable energy. The problem is, I'd say there's a lack of investable companies and opportunities that meet the type of returns and criteria that they're looking for. And unfortunately, what really happened, I'll say from 2020 through 2023, when everyone was gung-ho on the energy transition and, hey, we're going to be net zero by 2030, and there was a lot of capital chasing a dearth of quality opportunities. And those assets were bid up at the same time. Wall Street's going through the SPAC craze, and I always say the SPAC bubble. For those who don't know, SPAC is a special purpose acquisition company, and there was a huge wave of them during COVID and the zero interest rate policy, and really created a valuation bubble in many of these companies, and in companies that were immature, still very much almost at a venture stage, were brought public at valuations that were way too high. They put out forecasts and projections that were never realistic. Many of them have fallen flat on their face, and the returns to investors have been horrendous. So I think everyone's approaching opportunities today much more cautiously, much more thoughtfully, which is healthy. But the capital is not the issue. It's pairing the right sources of capital with the right risk and return characteristics.
Let me change the topic a little bit for a second and talk about nuclear, because that's the one thing that is completely emission free and, basically an endless source of power. And we have a new technology, the small modular reactor, which has been a lot of discussion about. I guess there's some talk about even starting 3 Mile Island and a lot of things. I will tell you this, I've looked at these statistics a lot, and historically, nuclear is the safest form of energy there is in terms of, the number of people the number of accidents people killed. And nuclear is, orders of magnitude safer than any other kind of industry. Now, obviously, it poses a tremendous risk if things really go badly, but that's never really happened so far except Chernobyl. And even the stats on Chernobyl are surprising if you look at them. So I'd like to just each one of you kind of give your assessment of where nuclear is right now, and is it likely to be a significant part of this transition? Is there anything going on in Houston about that? And so, John, why don't you start and tell us what you're seeing on the nuclear front?
Yeah, there's certainly a ton of interest in nuclear, and I think attitudes have shifted. A couple of years ago, nuclear, I'll say, was kind of lumped into the fossil fuel side of the equation. Now people have adopted it more as a clean energy since it's emission free. There's still issues with nuclear waste. Every source of energy has different externalities and problems you have to deal with, no matter what technology or source you choose. I think people have certainly realized if we ultimately do want to get to a net zero world, nuclear is going to probably be a big part of that equation. And more recently, there's several companies like Oklo, NuScale, and others that are pushing SMR technology, small modular reactors. These can range in size anywhere from a couple megawatts to 100 megawatts, and probably have a good use case for things like data centers. The problem is we really haven't built one yet. There's maybe a couple pilot projects that have been done. A lot of people want to build them, but there really isn't a permitting process for this type of product yet, and so everyone's trying to navigate the permitting process and financing one as well, because we've never done it before. There's unknown risks, and it's a new process.
Okay, so as part of my effort to work on long-duration energy storage, I took the ERCOT data in 2023, all the ERCOT data, and I stripped out the coal and I stripped out the natural gas. I said, can I make this system work? And what I found was the all-nuclear option was incredibly expensive, but the all-renewable option wasn't far behind it. They both were incredibly expensive. And actually, the best scenario was a nuclear, solar, wind mix, a hybrid scenario I referred to it as. So yes, nuclear build needs to be part of the discussion. We only have 5 gigawatts here in Texas. It was built in the 80s and 90s. We haven't built anything since. One of the interesting things about nuclear is I'm going to talk about big scale, like the Vogtle facility that was just built in Georgia. China and South Korea are building a lot of nuclear. And because they've standardized on a design and they're essentially just churning out that same big design, their costs have come down. The Vogtle built 2. They were called the number 3 unit and the number 4 unit. The number 3 had the huge cost overruns. The number 4 did not, because when you build the second thing, you've learned from the first. So until we get into a plan where we're building big nuclear plants consistently and it's the same design, I mean, face it, the car manufacturer doesn't custom build a car for you off of every one. That would be extremely expensive. Okay, small modular, I like the idea. I want to see efficiency. I want to know how efficient it is, because small modular is building off our knowledge of nuclear submarines, nuclear aircraft carriers. Navy doesn't care about efficiency. They want power. So we know small modular reactors will work. We've got tons of them on our Navy ships. But how efficient are they? How easy to implement? That's the part that we're trying to get over right now. And the efficiency part worries me.
I see Scott Roseller. I should have you up here talking about the South Texas nuclear plant sometime. What do you think about nuclear?
I don't have much to add about it.
I will tell you there is one project that's ongoing right now is Dow's announced that they're going to build 3 SMRs at their facility down in Freeport to power their own facility, and I think that's all it's in permitting right now. But they got some federal grants or some special permission or something on what it was. But they, in their disclosure documents, they say they're going to do that. I want to go to a little different topic for a second, then we're going to take some questions here, so we're running out of time. I would like y'all to talk about what's going on in China. Well, you've talked about it a little bit, but just kind of the view of each one of you and what China's doing, how that's different from us, what kind of different motivations they have, incentives they have than we do. And John, I know we talked about this on the phone. You were talking about it in terms of a national security issue for China, much more so than us. Can you just kind of talk about how you see what China's doing, how it's different from what we're doing, and kind of the comparative advantages, disadvantages?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at capacity, China is really the global leader in renewable energy. They're adding more capacity and more projects than anybody else in the world. A lot of that partly just due to the scale of their population and country. But China's also building crazy amount of coal plants, crazy amount of solar, wind, onshore and offshore. They're the leader in the manufacturing of solar panels and batteries, and I think they're kind of following the classic Chinese playbook. I mean, they've built more capacity in their factory than the world needs. So to think if we're going to compete with them assume it's a level playing field, we're probably never going to be able to build that equipment cheaper than they can. I think part of the reason China is building so much capacity is partly for national security reasons, right? China does not have the natural gas and oil resources that we have in our country, and they're sick of buying it from us or the Middle East. So I think that's a big part of their build out, in addition to just creating jobs for their population and taking advantage of the resources they have in their country. And because they've built so much capacity, they're basically dumping product on the rest of the world at prices we simply can't compete with.
So let me make you do a little thought exercise here. Turn around. You're now the leader in Beijing, okay? You don't have a lot of oil resources. You don't have a lot of natural gas resources. You got tons of coal. The tons of coal you can mine. Your pipelines to Russia are limited. You're buying a lot of Russian oil, but most of your oil and natural gas is coming from the Middle East. It goes past India. You fought a war with them in 1962. You just had a skirmish with them in, 2021, 2022 in the Kashmir? And then it goes to what's called the Straits of Malacca, where if the U.S. Navy parks one aircraft carrier, you're done. Okay? You are building coal power plants. You're building lots of renewables. You're building long-duration energy storage because you are vulnerable and you have a massive population and a massive energy demand. This is what China's doing. Now, I agree with John. They have gotten a head start on us for solar panels. They've gotten a head start on us with nuclear. They're building lots of nuclear power plants. We've got to stop thinking of this as a competition and start looking at what do we need, because that's what's driving China. China looked at their needs and they made calm, rational choices, and they have a 20-year energy plan. Where's ours?
Well, let me just put it this way. Everything that they build in terms of factories and other things are about half the cost of what it costs to build them here. So you just start there. And by the way, everybody should be, on the one hand, you could be should be very concerned because they are producing excellent products. I mean, those solar facilities all over the world are coming from China, and they're excellent. They have excellent tier one suppliers at incredibly in low cost compared to what we can do here. You could say, well, that's negative. Let's go fight them. I mean, and there's this other side of me that says, well, okay, the president, has come out and said, I think these electric cars are nonsense. We don't need electric cars. We don't, the Green New Deal is a sham. It's not a real, and essentially is mainly a climate denier. And, they're taking a different view. They have a very fundamentally different view about all of this. And unfortunately, it looks like to me, for the next 4 years, we're going to be living in the past and not dealing with the future, and they're going to be completely dominating the world. I mean, like, I go down to Chile. It just, you can't even believe it. You need to go to Chile. It's just as an example. And you go to Santiago, the buses are all electric buses made by BYD. Most of the new cars that are being sold are Chinese electric cars. All over the world, this is happening. And I think they just must be laughing themselves to death, saying, well, these guys are going to stay in the oil and gas sector. They're going to de-emphasize the future. And I don't think she's going to do that. I think he's got exactly the opposite view. And, at some point, you do have to ask the question from the point of view of who's serving the future of the world best. I would say that, quite frankly, and you're not going to like this, that what the Chinese are doing in terms of what they're actually producing for the world is without it, we would be in a much worse situation. So I, personally, I look at it and I say we ought to be trying to compete, but it's a tough situation to do it. And unfortunately, they leapfrogged us in terms of doing the things that are necessary to bring down emissions. And so that's their position, and our position is we don't need to worry about emissions. Well, I think that we're wrong about that. And I think the sooner we be honest about that, the better off we'll be, Bill.
Yeah, I think their motivation is a lot more about their security, because building coal plants is not reducing emissions. But by the way, I did see the other day that Biden is now building more electric vehicles than Tesla is, to give you some idea of how this is going. And they're about 20 or 30% cheaper. Okay, we're running out of time here, and I see some people getting restless. Let's take a few questions. Joe Allen, how you doing, buddy?
How about thermal energy?
Ge- Geothermal, you mean?
You talking about geothermal energy? Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, so geothermal, we are going to increase it. Fervo Energy, Sage Geosystems, there's a number of companies working on this. The problem is you're never going to be able to get full supply out of it. There's some papers that show that once you go into an area and drill in and start pulling the heat from below, the rocks from underneath have to send the heat up. So you'll see Fervo actually is doing work in Utah now because they're near a very strong upwelling of magma where they can get good heat. Most of the country doesn't have that. So you get less energy per acre here in Texas and in other places. So geothermal will become a bigger source. Totally agree with that. But I just don't see it doing the full workload.
It's a niche.
Now, I've always kind of got the impression it's geographically restricted. Yes, ma'am. All right.
I wanted to ask about what was your opinion about the 17 gas-fired plants that were funded by the state? Is that too little, too late? What are your perspective on that?
First off, I am developing long-duration energy storage, so I'm biased as hell. I would like to love some of that money have been given to long-duration energy, but anyway, not mind that. It's a question of your future natural gas supply. Doubling LNG export, the Marcellus, the Utica, the Haynesville, they've peaked. Oil supply from the Bakken and Eagle Ford has peaked. Eagle Ford natural gas is up slightly right now. The Permian literally drove last year to keep things up. And I can't tell you when the Permian will peak. It's somewhere in the next 3 to 8 years. There's so many variables at play that I can't come up with that number. But to me, it changes the equation. And the thing that drives me crazy is we've done this before. The Spindletop oil field in Beaumont was discovered in 1901. By 1902, it's 20% of U.S. oil supply. By 1936, it's making next to nothing. This is how oil fields operate. But we seem to think that this shale is going to go on forever. In fact, we have this, the energy secretary saying is 333. He wants 3 million more barrels a day within 3 years. I'm like, dude, where are you looking at? Because I'm not seeing it.
I'm really convinced that natural gas prices are probably headed higher because we've basically had free natural gas now for a decade or so, and I think that's probably over. Who do we have? Yes, sir.
Getting back to China, with them building so much on the
nuclear kind that you were talking about, and then having access to cheap coal and being able to build these facilities at a lower cost so we can build. What's the result of financially? You know, are they taking themselves into a hole where they got to be able to pay for this to make it work? You know, 2 15, 20 years from now.
I don't know enough about it to answer very intelligently, but you know, I don't think. I think a lot of these projects are state-sponsored. Returns are it's not the same system that we operate in the U.S. But I do think longer term, China certainly has a demographics problem, much like we may here, yeah. So hard to say if the energy projects themselves are digging them in a hole, but it's different constraints.
I think part of the issue is you remember China is actually a very poor country. You know, their GDP is 20% of what ours is on a per capita basis. This has got 400 million people that don't have running water and sewer, but their population is frankly not as spoiled as ours is, and so you know they can live at a lower level. But you know, one of the reasons they do things cheaper is they don't have OSHA to worry about. You know, they don't have the EPA to worry about. They go do what they want to do, and if they need to build something and you got to, you know, take all this land to do it, then all you people need to move, and we're going to go build this. So we've got a very different kind of regime here. All those things represent valuable, you know, values that we hold dear. So I don't know that we're going to give them up. But, you know, at the end of the day, China has this demographic problem I think is going to overwhelm them at some point. But if I were running China, you know, I'd be doing all this stuff right now to deal with that issue so that as it comes, I've got this industrial capacity to try to offset some of it. Yeah. I'm going to take one more question. We're at 12. You've already had one. So anyways, yes, sir. No, you've already had one too. And right back here, over here. Yeah.
Outside of 200 houses, and if we expand that, we're going to figure out what to do with a nuclear waste. Right. I mean, but the nuclear waste, if we've got more nuclear power, we need more nuclear waste that doesn't seem away. That's right.
So let me give you a quick answer to that because I've studied this a little bit. Yeah, we absolutely know what to do with it. We need to go put it in some really secure geological formation. Nobody in the United States wants to do that. We had a pretty good idea about a project to do it. It got killed for political reasons. And again, in China, they don't worry about that. They just go do it. So that's another problem that you have dealing with a democracy.
Look up Yucca Mountain in Nevada and how that project got killed.
Okay.
And then look at Sweden. They've built a Yucca Mountain conventional facility, and they're storing their nuclear waste.
Okay. Can we give a hand to the energy panel for John Daughtery? Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. So, everybody have a good time today? Are y'all interested in doing this again sometime in the future? Okay, all right. Well, we'll get back to you about that. Thank you all for coming. Some of us will be hanging around here for a while if you want to visit some.